Last time I tested the Kia Niro EV, I described it as sort of flying under the radar. This redesigned 2023 version, it changes all that, at least in terms of styling, but it's still just as approachable as ever, and I don't think there's an EV on the market that will make the move to electrification any easier than this one. It's also a bit cheaper than before once you move past the base trim, but I've got some serious range worries this time around that are holding me back in a big way. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. Let's kick things off this week by talking about pricing. And inflation may be cooling, but it's rare to see the price of a vehicle remain static or even drop from one year to the next. But both of those apply to this second generation Niro. The base MSRP, it's the same as it was last year. It's $45,000. And then the next two trims you can get are actually cheaper than the equivalent ones last year. So you have the Premium Plus that sits in the middle of the lineup, and that's 48 grand. And then you have this one, the Limited, the top of the lineup, and that's 53,000 bucks. So that's 1,700 less than it was last year, and the Premium Plus is 2,700 bucks less than the equivalent one last year. The bigger problem, well, freight is up almost $1,000. It's like 2,750 bucks this year, which is a lot of money to ship a car to a dealership, but it also means that the savings aren't quite as much as what they could be. Now, the good news is all three trims qualify for the full $5,000 federal rebate in Canada, and they also qualify for every provincial and territorial rebate too, which should help to chip away at the price. It's all sounding pretty good, right? So let's get to my problem, and that is range. Not necessarily what's listed, there's actually more this time. There's 407 kilometers, according to Natural Resources Canada and Kia, whereas the last gen version, well, it only had 385. And I gotta say, 407, still probably not gonna cut it for me if I were shopping for an EV like this, but I know a lot of you out there are probably okay with that. And that's according to that KPMG study I always reference that says 79% of Canadians would consider an EV that could cover 400 kilometers on a single charge. The problem is, I haven't been seeing anything close to that this week. When I picked it up, it only had 303 kilometers. And it seemed pretty accurate too. I did a 249 kilometer evaluation drive, and I got to a charger with 54 kilometers of range remaining. That's exactly 303 kilometers. So it was spot on. And then when I charged it, that jumped to 328 kilometers, I believe. Still not very good. It hasn't been very cold this week. It's been the tail end of winter. That's disappointing. The worst part is I can tell that this thing does have what it takes to overachieve, just like the last generation. That's what I really liked about the previous Niro, is that even with that 385 kilometers of official range, it didn't take much effort to outperform. This one, you can see glimpses of that. When I charged, I drove home, it was like 40 kilometers, and I was averaging 14.4 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. That is incredibly low, but now I'm back up to 19 and a half. So I'm sure the cold is having an effect, but again, it's not that cold. And this thing is pretty well broken in. It's got like 5,600 kilometers on the odometer. So really your only chance of this getting better is weather dependent. It has nothing to do with breaking in the vehicle. Now, DC fast charging maxes out at something like 85 kilowatts. So if you hook it up to a 100 kilowatt fast charger, should take you something like 45 minutes or so in ideal conditions to go from 10 to 80%, which isn't too bad, although a lot of EVs are doing better these days. 100, 130, 150 kilowatts, even something in that range would have been better to see than the 85 here. The other problem, yes, again, it's kind of cold out, but I haven't been able to touch anything close to those charging times. The other day when I hooked it up, I went from something like 18% to 99%, and that took an hour and 40 minutes on a 100 kilowatt charger. So a little longer than I would like to see. Now, the onboard charger itself, higher capacity, it's 11 kilowatts. Not too bad, especially because some competitors have even less. I think the Subaru Solterra has something like 6.6 kilowatts of that onboard charging power. It also means that depending on the level 2 charger you hook up to, it's going to take you anywhere from 6 to 9 hours to get a full charge. So not too bad, although that 9 hours is about what the last one could do. So not much improvement there, but there are some other improvements, starting with a huge one, and that is proper one pedal driving. One of my favorite features, not just in EVs, in vehicles in general. I love this ability to bring a vehicle to a stop without touching the brake pedal. You really do kind of get to know your vehicle really well. You can challenge yourself. It's a lot of fun and a great way to harvest kinetic energy. The last generation Niro, it did have adjustable regenerative braking, but it couldn't bring the vehicle to a complete stop just by easing off the throttle. If you wanted to do that, you had to pull the little paddle here on the left side of the steering wheel. But now it will do it on its own, and that is such a handy trick. It's a great way to put energy back into the battery pack, and it works without fail. It is very good. I will say, and I've said it before, you should exercise your mechanical brakes every now and then, because with this setup, really there's no need to use your mechanical brakes aside from when you're shifting from park to drive to reverse and back. But you should use them every once in a while just to make sure they don't seize up or run into any issues. That's something that EV drivers do have to keep an eye out for. But it is really cool that you can use proper one pedal driving here without fail. And it's nice to see Kia listening and growing throughout the generations of its vehicles. Something else that's new for this Niro is torque. There's actually less of it, but I think it's better for it. And hear me out, it's the same 150 kilowatt electric motor. Horsepower is the same, it's 201, but it used to have 291 pound-feet of torque, and this new one only has 188. So a pretty significant drop. But here's my thing. The last one wasn't especially speedy. It took, I don't know, almost 8 seconds to get to 100 kilometers an hour. This one does it in the exact same amount of time. But here's what I like. It's way smoother than before, and there's less of a chance of spinning your tires when you're accelerating away from a stop. Again, the last one wasn't super speedy, but that's a lot of torque, and especially on loose gravel. It was easy to break those tires loose if, I don't know, you were trying to get ahead, let's say of a street car, if you're in Toronto and you're in the right lane and you're going to pass it. Well, there was a good chance you were going to spin your tires. This one, not at all. It's just smooth and seamless torque. I really like the way it's delivered, and I really like the way the drive experience in general is delivered, and that was very much the case before too. I wouldn't say this thing's especially sporty, but it's engaging. So the chassis, the steering, it all feels really good. It means you know exactly what's happening. There's nothing that I hate more than very vague steering. That means if you are losing control on a really slippery surface, you aren't going to know which way the wheels are pointing. Here, you know exactly what's happening at all times, and it doesn't necessarily feel like an electric vehicle. That's something I've always liked about the Niro. If you are getting into an EV for the first time, this is a great candidate that almost makes you forget you're driving an electric vehicle. Now, yes, that regenerative braking as well as the immediacy of the torque. And when it comes to that braking, I would keep a bottle of Gravol in the glove box in case you have a passenger with you who is new to it. It can make you feel a little car sick, but if you shut it off, this thing feels almost like a conventional car, and that is super cool. So it's like I said off the top, there's less of a chance for this new Niro to fly under the radar, although a big reason this one I'm driving stands out is a pretty simple one. These gray plastic panels that you can only get with white paint on the top trim a $250 upgrade, but well worth it in my opinion. They really kind of tie together the European vibe of this redesigned Niro. I think it looks really good with the lighting elements and the overall proportions. Very cool. Now, regardless of what color these panels are, they aren't just about form, they're functional too. There are little air vents back here. They spit out behind the vehicle and they give this thing a coefficient of drag of just 0.29, which ain't too bad for a lump of a car. And don't get me wrong, I think the Niro looks good, but this isn't exactly an exercise in aerodynamics, so that is quite the achievement. Overall, this thing is a little bit bigger than the last one, although the gains are pretty marginal. You're probably not going to notice even if they're parked side by side and you're getting into both of them. Behind this hatch, there is a little bit more cargo space, although I gotta say, the fact that this thing does not have rear seats that can fold flat is a huge miss, especially because the last Niro had them. They didn't fold completely flat, but they were pretty close. This ain't close at all. There's a big hump right where the seats fold, and a simple solution would have been to use that same cargo floor like you can get in the Seltos that you can just lift up. It makes a flat load floor when you have the seats folded, but if you want to maximize the space, keep it lowered down. Overall, the cabin, again, a little bit bigger than the last one. Not much, but it does help. Now, something that carries over from the last one is the location of the charge port, but I do not like it at all. And you might be saying, Dan, makes a lot of sense to put it somewhere centralized like the front of the vehicle. And normally I'd be with you, except this is Canada. Our winters suck, and so does driving in them. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You're cruising down the highway, all that ice and slush is kicking up on the front of the vehicle. Now imagine just stopping to charge and having to pry open this flimsy plastic panel on the front. No good. Something that is good, at least a little storage compartment under the hood, not a full frunk, but it does help because it has room for the essentials. I don't necessarily think the Niro's cabin has regressed, but it's definitely not as practical as the old one. And a big reason why, that had that cool floating center console with the controls that were on that little tilt. I really like that because you had this massive storage bin just in front of it. You could put a purse there or just about anything you wanted to bring with you on the road. This one, it's a lot more conventional. There's not even a pass-through underneath anymore, which I really don't understand because there's no more need for mechanical shift linkages when you're talking about electric vehicles. So the fact that you can't slide anything underneath here is a big miss. And another one, no more physical controls. The last Niro had a ton of them. This thing, it has that same fiddly little touch panel that you get in something like the Kia EV6, where you toggle back and forth between HVAC and infotainment controls. And it's just one of those solutions to a problem that never existed. I understand that automakers like things to look fresh and cool, especially electric vehicles. They're looking to really spice them up with some tech, but this is not it. I absolutely hate it. It's just dumb. Something else that's dumb. All of this gloss black plastic, so much dust, it's impossible to keep it clean. You get fingerprints on everything. And this is very scratched up for a car with only 5,600 kilometers on the odometer, okay? It's just not treated very well, I guess, but this to me is just normal wear and tear. This is keys, rings, anything you might have with you every day. It's not like Edward Scissorhands was in here trying to fiddle with the heated seat, okay? These are people. And the fact that this is so scratched up is just terrible. Anyway, when you take a look at this touchscreen, well, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, they're both wired. No wireless connections, but at least they work in a widescreen format. That is great, and they work really well. And so does the companion smartphone app. I've had tons of problems with it in the past, but it seems like Kia has finally gotten it right, so you can control your vehicle, charge it, precondition the cabin, do all kinds of cool stuff. You can locate it. It's very neat, and it works just about flawlessly. That is awesome to see, and so is the advanced safety suite. You got pretty much everything you could ask for. Forward collision warning, lane keep assist, adaptive cruise control, all of that good stuff. This one I'm driving also has the advanced version of Kia's highway drive assist system, which means technically it will change lanes on its own. Now, yes, you do need to keep your hands on the wheel, and that is an important point. Don't forget, you cannot buy a fully autonomous vehicle, and right now, the only vehicles that you can buy that you can let your hands off the wheel on the highway come from Ford and GM. This one is a lot more like BMW's system, where you activate the signal, and as long as the lane beside you is clear, it'll change lanes. But the problem is, if it detects the slightest steering input, and I don't mean intentional stuff, let's just say, I don't know, you let some of the tension out of one of your arms while it's going to make that lane change. It recognizes that, it considers it steering input, and it cancels the automated lane change. And then vice versa, if you try to feather the wheel, it'll warn you to keep your hands on the wheel. It is very frustrating. This is about the third Kia that I've had this trouble with. It's one of those systems that I understand what the brand is trying to accomplish, but it's just not there yet. That is not good. It definitely needs some work. Otherwise, the feature set is pretty much what you'd expect. So you get standard heated seats, but you got to step up to the Premium Plus trim if you want a heated steering wheel. And then you got to go up to this Limited if you want stuff like ventilated front seats and heated rear ones. I also got to say, I don't know what kind of soup enthusiast decided to name this middle trim after that popular brand of saltine crackers, but it is very weird. Although I will say it's not as weird as the Niro EV in the US, where you get to pick between either wind or wave trims. I don't know who came up with those ones either, but they are very odd. But then again, I guess you are gonna need the wind at your back with such limited range in this new Niro EV. I'm still not convinced it's got what it takes, but then again, maybe I'll have to test it out in the summertime to see how it stacks up. To recap, I like the new look of the Niro EV, that it's got proper one-pedal driving nowadays, and that the prices come down a bit with this new version. I don't like that the range hasn't been anywhere close to advertised, that the redesigned interior isn't as practical as it used to be, and that it has this fiddly touch panel instead of proper controls. Look, I get that EVs perform worse in winter, but the reality is it hasn't even been that cold this week. So losing a good 20 to 25% of what's already fairly limited range is definitely concerning. And to make matters worse, the last time I tested the Niro EV, which was the previous generation, I didn't have anywhere near this kind of trouble. And that was in December of 2021 versus this test at the end of March 2023. So similar conditions overall. But if you can look past that, or at least pray that things get much better in warmer weather, this Niro just builds on all the good stuff from before with better styling, a little bit more space, and more useful features.